This is East Asia Tonight.
Good Monday evening. I'm Otelia Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Typhoon Narra is hammering southern China, displacing tens of thousands. Nearly 30 rivers have surged past warning levels, and the danger isn't over. More torrential rain is forecast through Wednesday. Now, the weather just as punishing across the Taiwan Strait. 4 people are missing as torrential rain shuts schools and offices, with the island bracing for a typhoon later this week. And China's moon ambitions have hit a snag, with the Chang'e 7 mission postponed after launch conditions weren't met, less than 2 weeks after a Long March 7 rocket exploded shortly after liftoff. And Washington is just hours away from unveiling what it calls its toughest ever sanctions on Iran, also targeting those who trade with Tehran. Beijing vowing to defend its interests at all costs. And Taiwan concludes months-long probe into smuggling of AI servers, indicts 9 people for illegally exporting high-end servers packed with NVIDIA chips to China. Also tonight, a hanging tire obstacle course, no hurdle for this robot, one of many participating in the World Humanoid Games in China. And as Japan swelters through a brutally hot summer, a clothes maker have come up with a novel solution to keep furry friends cool. Typhoon Narra is battering southern China with torrential rain and widespread flooding. Tens of thousands of people have been forced from their homes. In Guangxi province alone, some 54,000 people have been relocated, including more than 8,000 moved into emergency shelters. Now, floodwaters have submerged roads and buildings, with rescuers using boats to reach stranded residents. And the threat is far from over. Narra is part of a succession of typhoons affecting China's eastern and southern coastal regions. Now, officials have dispatched relief supplies to support flood-hit communities. The deluge also comes amid broader concerns over already elevated river levels across China. As of Sunday, nearly 30 rivers from Heilongjiang to Zhejiang, Jiangsu and Yunnan remained above warning levels. And in the worst case, water was more than 6 meters above the warning mark. More torrential rain is forecast through Wednesday across Guangxi, Guangdong, Hainan and Fujian, raising the risk of further flooding. And it looks like Narra has also impacted northern Vietnam. At least 1 person has died in a landslide, while more than 4,300 households are displaced. Widespread power outages have been reported, while more than 10,000 hectares of rice and other crops have been destroyed. Separately, torrential rain also pounding southern and eastern Taiwan, leaving 4 people missing and triggering widespread flooding. Streets in Tainan and Kaohsiung were inundated, as you can see, with car owners struggling through the rising water. Schools and offices in both cities were forced to shut. In Kaohsiung, the rain also caused a sinkhole to open up on the road. And the city is expecting more than 1.3 meters of rain over 5 days, nearly half its typical rainfall for an entire year. The extreme weather is also disrupting rail services, particularly along Taiwan's east coast. Well, despite the flooding, TSMC says that its factories are operating normally after activating routine heavy rain preparations. And Taiwan is bracing for more severe weather. Typhoon Saudal is expected to pass north of the island early Friday. It could bring another round of heavy rain. The storm is forecast to barrel through Japan's Okinawa and Amami Island chains tomorrow evening. Now, in less than half a day from now, the U.S. will announce what it calls its toughest ever sanctions on Iran as it steps up pressure amid the ongoing war with Tehran. Our U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has described the measures as the greatest financial offensive ever marshaled, warning countries doing business with Tehran could also face penalties. Iran has threatened to halt oil exports through the Strait of Hormuz if the economic pressure continues. Now, Washington has urged Beijing to cooperate with its campaign as China remains a major buyer of Iranian oil. As for Beijing, well, it said today that it will closely monitor the developments and take the necessary steps to protect its rights and interests.
制裁施压无助于解决问题，只会加剧紧张，深局局势，不符合任何一方的利益。中方呼吁各方保持理性克制，避免采取可能进一步激化矛盾冲突、冲击全球经济发展和金融稳定的举措，尽快回到对话谈判、政治解决的正确轨道上来。
Well, for more insights, let's bring in Brian Wong. He is a fellow from the Center on Contemporary China and the World at the University of Hong Kong. Thanks so very much, Brian, for joining us this evening. Now, let's first address the elephant in the room. It was not explicitly mentioned, China, right? But given its role as Iran's dominant oil buyer, Brian, tell us, what do you think his warning means specifically for Beijing?
I think it's tempting to, but erroneous to over-intellectualize the statements coming out of the Trump administration. What's clear and evident is that there's a lot of frustration, irritation, and consternation from the White House when it comes to the intransigence of the progress with regards to the war. And yet Trump is also caught between a rock and a hard place, the rock being, of course, the upcoming midterms, the challenges of the looming inflationary crisis. And yet, of course, on the other hand, the hard place being the wariness in general of entering into and also undertaking what's perceived to be a capitulating deal, and also to step back from and climb down from the crisis without anything in hand or having concretely been secured. And as a result of that, the Trump administration is lashing out in all directions. But this specifically is perhaps a technocratically crafted package that's unveiled and to be spearheaded under Secretary Bessent, who's obviously a very capable man, in driving through what they perceive to be efficacious containment measures in an attempt to cripple Tehran. But in all honesty, I don't think it's going to work. And of course, with the elephant in the room being the upcoming visit by President Xi to the US in late September, where Trump would hopefully want to secure not just a deal, but plentiful sort of symbolically powerful statements coming out from his best friend from China. Chances are the White House is wary of rocking the boat and therefore has opted for restraint in its rhetoric and also language thus far. But one cannot rule out the possibility that should Trump change his mind about this upcoming visit or meeting, he might just lash out on Truth Social. And that's, I suppose, where 90% of foreign policy decisions from America are made and announced these days anyway, too.
So, Brian, just picking up from what you're saying about don't over-intellectualize what comes of the White House these days. In other words, then, Beijing, I mean, how are they weighing that threat? Same thing as what you've just mentioned?
Well, I think Beijing's certainly concerned in general, right, about sanctions, especially sanctions that can't be evaded or avoided through, let's just say, very tactical means, right? These are the sanctions that would indeed complicate Beijing's attempt to stabilize and also to repair by and large, the investment environments and to recover from, of course, Nadia's reached a couple of years ago. But I wouldn't place too much weight, though, in this sort of this concern. And that's because Beijing has, beyond, of course, engaging with West-aligned and also US-facing companies, sought to diversify its investment streams and capital streams over recent years to build up firewalls, essentially insulating its transactions vis-a-vis Iran and also, of course, Russian entities, and to ensure that they are not so to speak, contaminating, right, the sort of West-facing aspects of its trade and export-import regime. So therefore, this containment, this sort of compartmentalization has been effectively developed as a mature regime over the past couple of years to insulate Beijing from the harshest and most acrimonious of Western sanctions. So on the front of the sanctions, I don't think Beijing is all that concerned ultimately. But on the second front, of course, what does Beijing make of the situation right now over the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea at large? On one hand, I think China is happy to see, some degree of stabilization and that there's a sort of ring fencing, right, and prevention of the escalation of the conflict into unmanageable sort of heights and intensity. And that's because Beijing, too, doesn't want to see ASEAN, the EU, and other very important markets to which Chinese companies exported goods excessively hampered and damaged by the ongoing crisis due to energy shortages. Right? This is not something that's in the interest of Chinese exporters, right? A recession in the EU or recession in ASEAN. And yet, on the other hand, there is a saying, which is if your rival is continually making mistakes, why interrupt it, right? And that same adage, rightly or wrongly, has been applied to both how Washington sees Beijing and Beijing sees Washington over recent years. Even despite a reasonable attempt and effort from both sides of the Pacific to stabilize that, to set a floor to the relationship, there's still this in-baked sort of perception of rivalry to that bilateral dynamic. And that is why neither Chinese nor American leaders, I suppose, are particularly trusting towards one another's words when it comes to the war in Iran, and perhaps not without good reason, or not for the want of a good reason either in that context.
So, Brian, I mean, all of this happening just weeks before, Trump and Xi are expected to meet in September. So I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, in terms of what's been announced, how do you think, that's going to constrain the way Washington and handles China over Iran?
Well, the trouble is, there's a lot of prospective items that could be discussed at the upcoming meeting, right? Semiconductors and export controls, attempts to kneecap and also induce, paradoxically, Chinese investment concurrently entering into the US, restoration of, quote unquote, more balance to trade in the eyes of the Americans, the situation in Iran, the war in Ukraine, AI safety and governance, you name it. All of these are items I'm sure analysts and pundits will say will be talked about by the two leaders in the upcoming meeting. And sure, they will be. Sure, there'll be conversations over these areas. But the trouble is, can there be any actual consensus, in a sort of tentative modus vivendi, right, arrived at for any of these questions? I don't think so. So chances are the upcoming meeting would be, by and large, a vibes diplomacy-driven effort where both leaders would affirm and renew their sort of personal ties and the good vibes that they'd accomplished in a previous visit, in which Trump would, of course, press Beijing for more concessions on the front of beans, Boeings, boards of trade and investment, if that's going ahead, the 4Bs, whereas Beijing, of course, would remain adamant that none of these concessions and, so-called olive branches could be extended without something concrete coming out of Washington in relation to Taiwan, South China Sea, and even indeed the Sino-Japanese relationship. So all in all, there's going to be a lot of, hot air, right, being aired and exuded by commentators and pundits from both sides in a run-up to the meeting. But by and large, I'd be pleasantly surprised, and not saying it's impossible, I'd be pleasantly surprised if there could be a modicum of consensus arrived at over AI usage and guardrails with regards to AI, as well as, of course, some sort of a degree of consensus over where Chinese investments ought to be allowed and encouraged in the American context. And I suspect these are two low-hanging fruits that are really where both sides are likely to, or the likeliest rather, to see relatively eye to eye and achieve some modicum of parity, even despite, of course, the growing concerns within the US, right, that this AI issue is going to be one that's going to determinatively influence and shape the Sino-American economic and also supply chain and industrial competition at large. And that sort of consensus from amongst the commentariat is certainly visible, but how much of that is going to trickle through to the White House, or more precisely, the one and only man at the helm of negotiations coming from America, that's a separate story and question altogether.
And to be left to be discussed another day. Plenty at stake there. Well beyond your run. Thank you so much for your insights. Brian Wong, fellow from the Center on Contemporary China and the World at the University of Hong Kong. Well, still have plenty more coming up next on East Asia Tonight. Shein sets its sights on Hong Kong, but at a steep discount. The fast fashion giant is seeking a $27 billion valuation, nearly 3/4 below its peak. And Alibaba shares slump after a discounted $10 billion share sale as investors question the price of its AI ambitions. Hello again. So good to have your company on East Asia Tonight this Monday. We've got Roland Lim here, standing by with the very latest business news. And Roland, is it apparently getting harder to stop banned AI chips from reaching China?
Well, today's Taiwan indictment, clear example of that, in spite of tighter enforcement and high compliance costs for tech firms. Our Taiwanese prosecutors say 9 people have been indicted over an alleged illegal export of high-end AI servers to China. The defendants include employees from the Taiwan unit of NVIDIA and Supermicro. Now, 8 of them have been charged with breach of trust and document forgery. The 9th defendant was charged in a related case for the alleged siphoning of funds from a distributor company. Our prosecutors say 130 servers were ordered from Supermicro. The scheme allegedly made it appear they were intended for use at a rented server facility in Taiwan. Now, false end-user documents claim these servers would be installed there. But 74 were ultimately delivered to Chinese customers. either directly or via transshipments through Indonesia, Japan, and Hong Kong. The probe kicked off in May with the arrest of 3 initial suspects accused of forging shipping documents. The NVIDIA chips being illegally shipped are subject to U.S. export controls. Prosecutors say the accused were, quote, fully aware that both companies had strict internal export controls, but they allegedly worked together to export the servers for large profits. Taiwan in recent years has tightened export controls to prevent its advanced semiconductors from reaching China. Washington has imposed restrictions since 2022 to make it illegal for such chips to be exported or sold in China without a license. Fast fashion giant Shein has launched its Hong Kong initial public offering, ending the company's years-long pursuit of an IPO. It's looking to raise up to $1.77 billion. CNA's Geraldine Yap tells us more.
This is Shein's third shot at listing, with previous attempts in the United States and United Kingdom derailed due to scrutiny over its supply chain, as well as regulatory roadblocks. Its current valuation of $27 billion is a far cry from its private market peak of nearly $100 billion 4 years ago. This comes at a time of slowing growth for Shein, which was at one point one of the most talked about companies in retail. Revenue in the first quarter of 2026 grew just 1.1%, and the company reported a $99 million quarterly loss. Analysts say Shein's pandemic-era business model is now being tested by the new market, where investors are moving towards AI-related investments. Questions also remain about how Shein can keep growing, with the US ending a policy allowing billions of dollars of low-cost imports to enter the country duty-free, and European authorities also imposing a €3 flat fee on parcels. One analyst expects retail investor appetite to be lukewarm, unlike other high-profile listings like Chinese AI-related firms CXMT Corp and Momenta that attracted massive oversubscription.
When we talk about retail business, when we talk about online, retail business, there's not something that we can have a very huge, growth story. So they're just doing business good as is, but slowing down, there's definitely no question asked. So it's a matter of the valuation now. It's priced reasonably, but I don't really see so much upside on their first debut in Hong Kong market.
Response to Shein's IPO has been mixed on social media. On Xiaohongshu or Red Note, a recent poll showed that more users voted to buy the company shares than not to buy, even as comments urged caution. However, reactions on social media in Hong Kong have been more negative, with some expecting shares to trade below the listing price and others questioning if the company is worth investing in. One scathing comment called it a kaipang, which means chicken farm, or a trap for investors. Shein says it aims to use 80% of the funds raised to improve its technology and boost its international presence. Cornerstone investors, including Tencent Holdings and Boyu Capital, have agreed to buy about $383 million worth of shares. At the same time, Shein will pay up to $3.5 billion in cash and shares to selected existing investors to help compensate them for the drop in its valuation. Trading will begin on 1st September. Geraldine Yap, CNA, Hong Kong.
Now, staying in Hong Kong, Chinese tech giant Alibaba turning to investors for fresh capital as it ramps up spending on artificial intelligence and the infrastructure needed to support it. The company is issuing around 700 million new shares in Hong Kong, raising more than $10 billion. Alibaba says all the proceeds will go towards its full-stack AI capabilities, including computing infrastructure, chips, and the development and deployment of AI models. It's the company's first equity share placement since its 2019 IPO and would mark the largest ever primary follow-on offering by a Hong Kong-listed company. Alibaba is stepping up its AI push even as it faces growing regulatory hurdles in the US. The company has already spent nearly half of its 3-year investment budget. Now, its latest quarterly net profit fell 75%, partly due to accelerated investments in AI. Shares of Alibaba falling sharply in Hong Kong after that announced plan. Investors increasingly worried about the payback from its massive AI spending. The fundraising will also dilute shareholders' interests. Alibaba's move comes amid a series of fundraising plans in the China market. Now, last week, Chinese robotics company Unitree jumped more than 600% at the open in its Shanghai debut. But the broader equity benchmarks sliding with the tech-heavy Shenzhen component leading losses today. China's economic growth has been slowing, weighed down by weak consumer spending, job uncertainties, and a prolonged downturn in the housing market. Another growing concern is the rise of AI and its potential impact on the workforce. We take a look at how AI is reshaping China's massive job market.
Computer programmer Fei Zhaojun's boss asked him if AI could soon replace humans in coding jobs. 2 weeks later, he was laid off from his job in Beijing, along with around 160 of his colleagues.
我觉得我被 AI 替代了，也裁员之后，我现在有3个月了，没有投简历，没有找工作，因为我觉得我即便投简历找工作也找不到工作，因为40岁的程序员没有人会看上你。
This is becoming a common situation in China as AI reshapes the huge job market and workforce. The country is at the vanguard of AI adoption. State policies encourage people and businesses to apply the technology across various aspects of life. Some economists, however, believe this may undermine the overall strength of the economy.
So I think the government is still studying the impact, the actual impact, because it's still unfolding. I think this year we are seeing more stories of the impact on the labor market. I think it's still trying to evaluate the pros and cons of letting the AI develop. But I think overall this is something that you really can't do too much out from the standpoint of a government.
Humanoid robots can now sort parcels in postal centers. This is, however, still on a trial basis. Generative AI is also increasingly used for creation, production, and distribution in China's short drama industry.
你要可以用 AI 就是批量生成好多剧本，然后并且可以去有调试 AI 的能力，然后还有可以用它去生参考图，还有可以用它去生视频这一类的。但其实作为一个编剧，其实这些有点超纲，其实根本不需要这些东西。
China's new 5-year policy blueprint laid out its ambitions to infuse AI across various industries. It's part of the party's plan to dominate the tech space and gain an edge over rivals such as the US.
Certain types of tasks that once required specialized training can now be performed by anyone with access to an AI tool. And that is especially true of software engineering and certain types of multimedia creation. So if your role is narrowly concentrated in these areas, it's very likely that a lot of what you do is being taken over by AI.
Chinese tech giants have also been cutting tens of thousands of jobs, partly due to AI, leaving the outlook for the broader jobs market uncertain.
Chinese smartphone maker Xiaomi unveiled a new processor chip today, a year after it launched its first, as the company joins the likes of rivals Apple, Samsung, Huawei in developing its own chips. The X-Ring 03 will reportedly be produced by TSMC using chipmaker's 3-nanometer technology. It's expected to power Xiaomi's upcoming flagship folding phone, with the company targeting to deliver up to 300,000 units. Hyundai Motors Workers Union is back at the negotiating table after staging its first full-day strike in a decade on Friday, which saw around 40,000 employees walk off the job. A 4-hour walkout today has been scrapped, but another one planned for tomorrow may still take place. The union's demands include a $108 increase in the basic salary, a 50% increase in bonuses, and the raising of the retirement age. The demands come amid concerns over job security in the automotive sector, which is being transformed by AI. And that is your business update at this hour. Otele.
Thanks so very much, Roland. Well, coming up next on East Asia Tonight, China suffers another setback to its space ambitions, delaying the launch of an unmanned lunar mission just weeks after a rare rocket failure. We're going to be speaking to an expert on the legal implications of the race to establish a foothold on the moon. Hello again, you're watching East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we're following. Typhoon Narra batters China's southern Guangxi region, displacing more than 50,000 people, with more forecasts of downpours to come. Separately in Taiwan, extreme rainfall inundates major cities in its east and south, leaving 4 missing and forcing the closure of schools and offices. And Taiwan indicts 9 over illegal exports of sanctioned high-end chips to China, including NVIDIA and Supermicro employees, after a months-long AI server smuggling probe. And China's search for water at the lunar South Pole will have to wait as Beijing postpones its unmanned Chang'e 7 mission to the moon, citing unmet launch conditions. As mentioned, China has postponed its Chang'e 7 robotic lunar mission, with authorities saying that conditions for a launch failed to be met. Now, the space agency says the mission can no longer be carried out within this year's planned launch window. Just last week, the space agency said that the Chang'e 7 lunar probe and its Long March 5 carrier rocket had been moved to the Wenchang spacecraft launch site. But authorities said that the decision to delay the mission was made in the interest of prudence, reliability, and ensuring the mission's success. No further details were given. A launch had been widely expected this week, although no official date had been announced. The uncrewed Chang'e 7 mission was meant to search for water at the moon's south pole, part of Beijing's push to land astronauts on the moon before 2030. Well, the delay is also having an impact on some businesses in Wenchang. One hotel we spoke to says it has received cancellations for 20% of its rooms since the postponement was announced. It says that refunds will be offered to some affected guests.
This beach in Wenchang is popular among space enthusiasts and tourists to watch rocket launches. And there was plenty of anticipation this time around. In the area, hotels and guest houses were preparing for an influx of people. But over the weekend, we heard from some local businesses that the rocket launch may not go ahead as expected, and this was before the official confirmation by authorities on Sunday night. Now, this area would typically be packed on launch day. And this time around, many families taking advantage of the school summer break to travel here to watch the rocket blast off. Instead, the crowds are missing and the launch pad stands empty.
还是多少有点遗憾吧，因为我们上周六就坐船特意过来了，因为坐船光过船就过了5个小时，所以过来会觉得发射不了了。但是我们今天也很早过来了，是想看一下那个火箭能不能转运到进去，让带小孩看一下火箭。他很喜欢天文的，但是他没有看到实物的火箭，所以就想让他过来体验一下。
我觉得这个是完全可以理解。如果说是我们要冒这个险啊，一旦出现问题呢，后果就不堪设想。所以对这个对我们来讲，虽然这次没有看到是一个遗憾，但是这个其实从我角度来讲，这也是非常难得一遇的一个状况啊，尤其随后还会有这个我们所谓的这个回撤。
The delay comes 2 weeks after a Long March 7A rocket carrying a communication satellite failed following an in-flight anomaly, exploding shortly after taking off from the same Wenchang launch site. Now, the cause remains under investigation. And for more insights, we are joined now by Emeritus Professor Stephen Freeland at Western Sydney University and Bond University. Well, thanks, Prof, so much for joining us on CNA for the first time. First up, let's just start with this delay. I mean, what actually happened here? I mean, China didn't exactly go into the details of what's gone wrong, but when you hear that, you know, that it did not meet launch conditions, and this comes so shortly after Long March 7A Chinese rocket did not failed, right? What's your read on this?
Well, thanks, Telly. I mean, as you say, the Chinese authorities have not given specific reasons, but these are incredibly important and complex missions. And, so many things have to be aligned, have to be right. And if there are any potentials for anomalies, caution is always the best way to take it. And, I don't see this necessarily as a setback. Obviously, it delays things by some period of time. A setback would be if this would have taken off and an anomaly would have taken place. That would have put the program back because there would have been investigations and everything else would have been put on hold. This way, I think what the authorities were probably doing, given that you have weather conditions there as well, but there's also a complex period of time only within which to land the lander in the south polar regions of the moon. And so there is a limited window of time. And I think being cautious in the guise of safety, of prudence, as they say, is actually the right approach. Space is hard. As you said, they had an anomaly with a launch vehicle a couple of weeks ago. Things can go wrong. And so you have to take every effort to make sure that you are maximizing the possibilities for success. There will always be risks, but you have to applaud decisions like this because they're not easy to make, but they're the right decisions.
And Professor, I hear what you're saying about this is not exactly a big setback. You've established that. I want to talk more about how China isn't the only one, that's sort of looking up, having these ambitions on the lunar South Pole. How much of a race is now developing over, who gets there and who gets access to resources like water and ice, for instance?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. It depends who you speak to. I mean, I have a role at the United Nations where I'm chairing the discussions, where actually with all of the countries in the room, including the two that you mentioned, but many others as well, 110 countries, we are looking at putting together the principles for future activities that might involve space resource extraction or utilization. So there's a lot of work being done. Of course, geopolitically, there is a rhetoric about, we want to be the first. There's a great deal of national pride involved. But these are incredibly complex missions, and they involve as much cooperation as they do competition. I mean, just witness the Chang'e 7 mission itself. There are payloads from many other countries, including from an American NGO. So that's an essence of how interrelated the technologies of different countries are. Of course, countries would like to be the first. They would like to say they're the first. But, what people are looking to achieve in the future will involve knowledge from many, many missions. Each mission allows us to learn more. If the Chang'e 7 mission ultimately succeeds, we will learn more, and that will help not only the Chinese, but it will help other countries as well, including the Americans and many others, in the way that they move forward. We need to understand the science. We need to understand the geography and the topography. We need to understand what is there. We need to understand what the hazards are because there are many challenges. And so, of course, at a geopolitical level, at a rhetoric level, people might talk about a race, but I think race is the wrong way of looking at it. Every time you have a race, then that doesn't necessarily encourage long-term programs, because once someone is perceived to have won a race, then they move on to something else. Rather, this is a long-term adventure, endeavor by humanity. Countries like China, like America, and many others have wonderful technology to contribute, and with an understanding of the mixed of questions and answers that technology provides us with, will we be able to move forward?
So that, brings us to the bigger question of who gets what. You have the tough task at the UN, trying to set the rules around all these space resources. But how do we prevent this idea and mentality that if I get there first, effectively this belongs to us?
Yeah, well, firstly, the existing law and all of the countries state all the time that they subscribe to the existing law. The existing law doesn't allow for territorial claims. We all understand that. Those countries that have planted flags on the moon, for example, don't do that by claiming territory. They do that as a source of national pride. Now, when you talk about resources, of course, that adds a complexity to it. But as I said, the community of countries have decided that we need to build on the existing law with a fundamental set of principles. Principles around safety, around sharing of information, around compliance with international law, around cooperation. Of course, with those principles in place, if we can get them all to agree, and we're making progress, consensus is difficult, but we're making progress, that will still allow them to compete. Of course, there's competition, but if you have competition on the basis of an agreed foundation that is designed to maximize the benefits of any activities and minimize the risks and ratchet down the tensions, then you have the greatest possibility of, one, success, but two, promoting peaceful and sustainable activities and understanding more about what humans and what their role is in the universe and understanding more about science and everything else. All of those activities will build on each other. You know, these things cannot be rushed. They're very complex. And I think we are taking a step-by-step approach. That's not exciting, it's not sexy, but it's what we need to do to ensure that, as I say, there's a maximization of benefits for humanity and a minimization of risks.
So if we bring this back to our part of the world, East Asia, that's the name of a bulletin after all. So Japan and South Korea and others, you're also developing their own space capabilities. So as China becomes a much bigger lunar power, how do you see this region, I mean, fitting into all the rules and partnerships you talked about that's going to shape what happens on the moon?
Well, this is a very vibrant region, the Southeast Asian region. You know, I've done a lot of work with many of the countries in the region, Singapore, of course, Thailand and Malaysia and Vietnam and Indonesia and Philippines. They've all got space agencies. They've all got ambitions. They all understand the importance of space. They all have incredibly clever people. They're all looking to develop missions that make sense for themselves, for the region. So, of course, China is a major spacefaring nation, but China itself is working with some other countries. For example, in the Chang'e 7, you know, there was a payload from Thailand involved in the lander vehicle. So the Asian region is vibrant, it's moving forward. The example of China and Russia and India and the United States and Canada and Japan, all of those, and the UK, major spacefaring nations, they themselves are interested in working with countries in the region. So I see it as a very exciting time for the region, but I prefer not to see it as a race between competing groups. I mean, that's how it's portrayed by some, of course. I understand that. But space is different. You know, in a sense, it's so complex that we need to understand that there's a lot that we can learn from others. We can compete, but we can compete in a way that allows us all to engage in activities in a peaceful and sustainable way.
So still plenty to be worked out then, both on Earth and on the moon. Thanks so very much for joining us. Really appreciate your time and thoughts on this. Professor Stephen Freeland, Emeritus Professor of International Law at Western Sydney University. And for more of our space-related coverage, do log on to our website, cna.asia, and our mobile app as well. Coming up on East Asia tonight, South Korea says that the North is preparing to send more troops to Russia, but there are no signs a new deployment is imminent. And teams from 16 countries put their machines to the test at the World Humanoid Robot Games, showcasing their potential beyond the competition arena. South Korea says the North is continuing to make preparations for further troop deployments to Russia. Seoul citing intelligence saying that it has detected signs and that it's tracking developments, but an imminent dispatch has not been identified. The assessment follows claims by Ukraine's president that Russia was expecting tens of thousands of additional troops from Pyongyang. Though Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Yo-jong, has denied this. Seoul says that North Korea has continued to supply Russia with weapon systems, including short-range ballistic missiles. And it's also estimated to have supplied Moscow with more than 15 million rounds of artillery ammunition. South Korean intelligence officials add that North Korean missiles used in Russia's war on Ukraine may have improved in accuracy. Based on recent battlefield data, they expect Russian technical advice and component support have helped advance the North's missile capabilities. Now, officials warn that the experience Pyongyang is gaining in the Russia-Ukraine war could increase the military threat facing South Korea. And earlier, my colleague Paul Sung spoke to Grant Newsham from the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies about growing North Korea-Russia military ties. And he shared how combat experience in Ukraine could make Pyongyang a more dangerous adversary.
Well, anytime you've got some real combat experience, and particularly if you live to tell about it, it makes a military better. And there's a psychological aspect to sort of military capabilities. And now that the North is finally getting some fairly large-scale experience in actual combat, that has, as I said, has a psychological effect, but also where you can go test your drones, your ballistic missiles. You can figure out how to use them better in real combat conditions against a real good adversary, the Ukrainians. That's very helpful. You can make the adjustments necessary to make it more effective. The ballistic missile is as well, which the North Koreans are supplying and operating apparently, that you can get the targeting better, you can get the payloads better. So this real-world experience allows the trial and error. That is how you actually get better as a combat force. And anytime you can get it, that it's a good thing from your perspective. So the North Koreans are no longer really sort of a laughing stock that they were, say, 10, 20 years ago. This experience is something they will sort of translate into real capabilities on the peninsula. I think the allies, the South Koreans and the Americans, will still prevail, but it could be a lot more costly than would otherwise be the case.
And looking ahead, what worries you most about the military relationship North Korea and Russia are building?
The biggest concern I have is that it is turning into a genuine operational capability where the North Koreans are able to bolster the Russians so that the Russians can cause trouble in Ukraine and beyond in Western Europe, and vice versa. The Russians can help the North Koreans so that they're more of a threat in their region. And keep in mind that North Korean missiles already can reach parts of the United States. And from now, it's just an engineering problem where they get longer range and better accuracy. But even more so, I'm very concerned about China's role in all of this. North Korea could not do anything to support Russia without China's approval. And that is always been the case. North Korea wouldn't exist without China's support. So China is using North Korea as its proxy, as it always has, but it's much more able to exert influence in the region and potentially beyond. And that works very much to China's benefit. And China does look at the North Korea-Russia alliance as it may be an alliance of convenience, but it's certainly one that allows Beijing to exert its influence into Europe, into Northeast Asia, and surrounding areas. So that's what I'm most concerned of, is this trilateral relationship between these three countries, and China's role in all of this should not be overlooked.
Now, the U.S. has cancelled next month's joint marine drills with South Korea after Washington cited constraints on the availability of its forces due to the war in Iran. Both sides are discussing when the exercise could resume. It's the latest blow to the ironclad alliance. President Donald Trump last week scaled back annual joint drills, calling them an inappropriate and hostile signal towards North Korea. Mr. Trump also said that the United States is bearing most of the cost and mentioned South Korea's refusal to join American efforts in denuclearizing Iran. A delegation of Japanese lawmakers has left for China in an effort to improve strained relations between the two countries. Now, ties between Tokyo and Beijing have deteriorated following Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi's comments on a possible conflict over Taiwan. Now, a member of the delegation, Shinichi Issa, said that the visit was an opportunity to reopen dialogue at a time when communication between both sides has largely broken down. The delegation includes lawmakers from both the ruling and opposition parties. Last November, Prime Minister Takaichi said that a conflict over Taiwan could prompt a military response from Japan. Beijing, which considers Taiwan part of its territory, strongly protested those remarks. China later warned its citizens against traveling to Japan and imposed trade restrictions on the country. The trip comes as other groups also seek to maintain engagement between the two countries. Local media report that around 80 business representatives from Western Japan are planning a separate visit to China later this year. China's cutting-edge humanoid robots are being put to the test at the second edition of the World Humanoid Robot Games. One such robot recorded a 7.97-meter long jump at the World Humanoid Robot Games in Beijing on Sunday, and the performance earned a gold medal in the long jump final. A total of 21 teams participated in the event, but only 6 recorded valid attempts. The robot from Team Tianzhou made 3 jump attempts and it improved with every jump, hitting 7.32, 7.63, and then 7.97 meters. Now, among the events were the 100 and 400-meter obstacle courses, and they feature stations such as ramps, a crawling tunnel, and tire array. The robots are judged based on their finished time plus penalties. Some also competed in the gymnastics segment. It's a floor routine event rather than one that uses apparatus. Now, organizers say that gymnastics has been made more difficult this year to push the limits of a humanoid's balance and flexibility. This is the second edition of the Games, with more than 2,000 robots participating. More than 1,000 competitions are taking place, including table tennis and football. Some will also take part in real-world challenges. Robots will be judged on their speed and accuracy in precision tasks like opening bottles and tightening screws. The Robot Games will wrap up on Wednesday. Japan is sweltering through another dangerously hot summer, but people aren't the only ones feeling the heat. Pet owners are turning to a new kind of cooling gear designed to help dogs and cats cope with such extreme temperatures.
For Japan's pets, even a short walk can be a struggle in this heat. With temperatures forecast to reach 39 degrees Celsius in parts of western Japan, the heat is forcing some owners to rethink even their daily walks.
I have never lived in a hotter country than here. It is very dangerous even for us humans, and for dogs who cannot sweat like us, it's even worse. So August, September, I'm always concerned what's going to happen to Momo if I let her out even for 15 minutes. So we actually try to avoid walking during the day.
One solution, this jacket with built-in fans. Battery-powered fans pull air into the jacket and circulate it around the body. An ice pack at the collar cools the air as it moves through the jacket.
これだと全体がこうお腹からも冷やしてくれる。で冷やしすぎない。自然の風なので具合悪くなることがならないっていうのがいいですね。お腹側も冷えてるんですよ。涼しいな。幸せですって言ってます。ハッピーハッピー。
The product is inspired by fan-equipped workwear worn by Japanese construction workers. Its maker says veterinarians helped develop the design, which targets areas where major blood vessels run.
獣医師の先生と相談をさせていただきながら、開発していったんですけど、やはりその時に言われたのは、やっぱりワンちゃんも人間と同じで、要は太い血管が通っているところを冷やしてあげるといいよと。 で人間もそうですね、首元ですとか、脇の下とかはやっぱ熱出た時に冷やすのと同じように、やっぱりワンちゃんもやっぱ首元、それから、脇の下とかこういったところを冷やすということが大事だという話なので、そういったところが重点的に冷えるような設計の商品を作ったというところです。
The latest version comes in 4 sizes and costs 16,500 yen, or about $100. Nearly 10,000 have been sold since the first series launched in 2022. And as heat waves intensify in Japan and elsewhere, the maker says demand for ways to keep pets cool could grow.
These are some lucky cats and dogs. On that note, we wrap up Monday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. See you again tomorrow.